I remember a Christmas when I was a kid. Not the one with the gifts, but the one with the family photos. My mom, dad, and my older sister, Janelle, were all laughing and smiling, but I was nowhere to be seen. Janelle had told me I was too tired to join, so I had to stay in the corner of the room. Looking at that old picture now, I see a small gap between my parents, a space where I was supposed to be. It's funny how a single photo can hold so much history, how it can show you the quiet places you've been pushed, the spaces you've been told were never meant for you. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you'd consider subscribing to my channel, it would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Nora. It's funny how the deepest cuts don't always leave a scar you can show people. The first time I remember being told there was no room for me wasn't with words, but with a picture. I must have been around 7, a quiet child with a mop of brown hair and a love for books that bordered on obsession. It was Christmas, and the house was a symphony of pine needles and cinnamon, a perfect, sparkling scene. My older sister, Janelle, had just gotten a new camera, a sleek black object that felt impossibly professional in her hands. She was the star of every scene, a loud, charming firework, and I was the quiet, introspective shadow, content to watch from the sidelines. My parents sat on the couch, wrapped in each other's warmth, their faces bright with holiday cheer. Janelle, a whirlwind of bows and wrapping paper, were called out. Everyone, smile for the camera. I stood by the fireplace, my nose buried in a thick, leather-bound book about anatomy, a Christmas gift from a well-meaning aunt who thought my fascination with the human body was endearingly quirky. My mother glanced at me, her smile faltering for a split second. "Nora, honey, put that book away. It's Christmas." I didn't want to. My book was a fortress against the overwhelming noise and laughter, a place where I felt safe. But my mother's voice carried the weight of a silent command, so I reluctantly closed the book. That was when Janelle's voice cut through the air, sharp and impatient. "Nora, you're in the way of the shot." I moved, trying to shrink, to become invisible, my little 7-year-old body trying to make itself as small as possible. The camera flashed, a bright, blinding light that seared itself into my memory. A few moments later, Janelle announced, "Nora, you're too tired. Go to bed early." My mother didn't object. My father didn't say a word. I went to bed that night, my encyclopedia clutched to my chest, a small, cold knot in my stomach. Years later, looking at that old photo, I noticed it a perfect, clean gap between my parents, a space where I was supposed to be. It was a space they had meticulously carved out, a place I would spend my entire life trying to fill. This wasn't a one-time event. It was the prologue to a lifetime of feeling like a guest in my own home. My childhood was a series of quiet nudges and gentle shoves, a constant reminder that I didn't quite fit. While Janelle was the social butterfly, a master of turning every setback into a captivating story. I was the one who sought solace in books. My family had their own rhythms, their own inside jokes, and I was always the one who broke them. They called me the failure adapter, a cruel joke that started after I failed to make the cheerleading squad, but found a deep passion in science club. The nickname stuck, a constant low hum of disapproval in the background of my life. I learned to keep my thoughts about my anatomy books to myself, to not talk about the latest scientific discovery I found fascinating. My parents' love felt conditional, a prize to be won by not rocking the boat. When I got a full scholarship to college, their reaction wasn't cheers and embraces, but a quiet fear. "Who will you marry?" my mother asked, her voice laced with worry. "Men don't like women who outshine them." I didn't laugh. I just packed my bags and left, carrying their fears and expectations with me, a heavy backpack of guilt I would carry for years. My medical school journey was a blur of long nights, burning the candle at both ends, and living on a diet of instant noodles. I worked as a waitress, taking graveyard shifts no one wanted, coming home with blistered feet and a bone-deep exhaustion that never seemed to go away. To them, I was just a doctor now, a symbol of the success they never achieved, and a source of financial support they took for granted. They never once came to visit, never called to see how I was doing. They would only call when they needed something money for a new car, help with a medical bill, a favor from a doctor friend. I always said yes. I felt it was my duty, my way of repaying them for all the sacrifices they had made for me. My husband, bless his heart, was the one who saw the toll it was taking on me. He would often ask, "Nora, why do you let them do this to you?" And I would just shrug, unable to explain the deep-seated need to be loved, to be accepted, to be a part of their world. I was still that little girl in the corner of the room, desperate for a place at the table. Our relationship with my family was a fragile one, a carefully constructed illusion of normalcy. We would get together for holidays, and I would pretend not to notice the subtle digs, the whispered jokes at my expense. I would pretend not to hear my dad call me the one who got away, as if my success was a form of betrayal. It was an unspoken rule that I would always be the one to pay, to provide, to clean up after their messes. I bought them a modest 2-bedroom house, paid their mortgage, and handled their medical bills. I thought this was my way of buying their love, of finally earning my place, but they saw it as an obligation, a debt I owed them for being a failure adapter who somehow succeeded. I would get calls from Janelle complaining about her life, and I would just listen, knowing that any suggestion of my own happiness would be met with a silent, cold wall of resentment. The final straw, the one that broke the camel's back, came 3 weeks before Christmas. Janelle called me, her voice dripping with an oily sweetness. "Nora, honey," she began, "my little Sophia got accepted into this amazing STEM summer camp. It's so prestigious, and you, of all people, would know how important this is. My niece, Sophia, was a sweet, smart girl, and I genuinely wanted to help her. But I also knew this was a test, a way for Janelle to exert her control over me. She'd been pushing me for months, trying to get me to pay for things she could afford herself. When I refused, her voice turned sharp, like a switch had been flipped. Wow, Nora must be nice to have everything and still be so stingy, she snapped. You're just jealous because Sophia is actually going places. The words were a slap in the face, a painful reminder of my childhood, of all the times I was told I was too smart, too ambitious, too much. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling, a cold, hard resolve settling in my heart. 3 weeks later, on Christmas Eve, I received a call from my daughter, Lily. "Mom, I'm here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the loud Christmas music and laughter in the background. "But I'm not coming in." A knot of dread formed in my stomach. "Why not, honey?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Grandma said there's no room," she replied, her voice cracking in the middle. I didn't need to ask for more details. I knew what they were doing. They were punishing me for saying no to Janelle, and they were using my daughter as their weapon. It was a cold, cruel, and calculated act of revenge. "I'm on my way," I said, and hung up the phone. The drive home was a blur. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the anger bubbling inside of me. I had always been the quiet one, the one who never caused a scene. But this time, they had gone too far. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. When I arrived home, Lily was sitting on the couch, her overnight bag still zipped up and her coat tossed over the armrest. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she was hugging her knees to her chest. I sat down next to her and wrapped my arms around her. She leaned into me, her body trembling with silent sobs. She didn't say a word, but her tears said it all. I didn't need to ask what happened. I knew. She had packed her bag so carefully, picked out a special sweater to wear, and even baked a cake for them. But They had turned her away. The cold, hard truth of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. They hadn't run out of room, they had run out of gratitude. And they had used my daughter to send the memo. That was the moment the switch flipped. No more explanations. No more polite negotiations. Just action. I woke up the next morning with a quiet resolve. My husband, bless his heart, knew something was wrong but didn't ask questions. He just stood there, a silent pillar of support. As I walked over to the kitchen table, I took out a pen and a piece of paper and began to write. It wasn't a letter of anger or resentment. It was a legal notice, a notice from our lawyer, stating that we would no longer be paying for their mortgage, their utilities, or their medical bills. After 20 years of silent sacrifice, I was finally taking a stand. I didn't feel a sense of triumph, but rather a quiet, cold calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. I folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and drove to their house. I didn't ring the doorbell. I simply tucked the envelope under their doormat and walked away. The phone call started almost immediately. My mother's voice was filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. "How dare you?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "After everything we've done for you." My dad's voice was next. "If you do this, you're no daughter of ours," he bellowed, his voice filled with a fake sense of authority. But they never asked why. They never asked what happened. They never even mentioned Lily's name, not once. They were so consumed by their own sense of entitlement, their own greed, that they couldn't see the wrong they had done. I hung up the phone. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. A week later, my mother showed up at my doorstep, holding the crumpled, damp letter from our lawyer. She was wearing a fuzzy robe, the same one she wore every Christmas. "You're really doing this," she hissed, her eyes filled with a venomous glare, "after everything we've done for you." I looked her in the eyes, my voice quiet and calm. "You mean the house I bought for you, the bills I paid, the health coverage I arranged." My words hung in the air, a cold, hard reminder of all the things I had done for them. She flinched, but quickly recovered. She then tore the letter in half, as if that would somehow void the legal process. "There," she said. "That's done now. Now you'll pay for Janelle's daughter's summer camp, and we'll forgive you." I just stared at her. And in that moment, I realized they had never taken me seriously. Not for a second. I stood on my porch, watching my mother walk away, her back rigid with self-righteous anger. She had torn up the eviction letter as if that act alone could erase its legal weight. "We'll forgive you," she had said, a phrase that echoed in my mind like a warped record. She was still the matriarch of a fantasy, a queen in a castle of her own making, and she had the audacity to offer me clemency. It was in that moment I knew, with a certainty that was both devastating and liberating, that they would never change. My mother, my father, Janelle, they were all trapped in a narrative where I was the villain and they were the victims. I closed the door quietly, the click of the lock a final, resolute sound. This wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation anymore. It was about severing the ties that had strangled me for decades. I met with my lawyer 2 days later. His name was Mr. Evans, a kind elderly man who had handled my parents' will and my own legal matters for years. He listened patiently as I recounted the events of Christmas Eve. My voice a flat, emotionless drone. I didn't cry or shout. There was no rage left, only a cold, methodical clarity. I laid everything out on his desk, the deed to the house, the mortgage statements I'd been paying for 7 years, the utility bills, the health insurance summaries. He didn't flinch. "I assume you want a formal eviction?" he said, his voice calm and professional. I nodded, and this time they won't be able to tear it up and pretend it didn't exist. The notice was sent out that same week, a legal document, stamped and certified, giving them 60 days to vacate the premises. It was official, it was final. I kept paying the mortgage. I wasn't about to let my credit die for the sake of a statement, but everything else was gone. The utilities, the cable, the medical reimbursements. They got a crash course in what no support actually looks like. 2 weeks later, there was a knock at my door. It was my Aunt Elaine, a woman I had always considered the good one, the kind one. She held a tin of homemade cookies in her hands, her face a mask of practiced concern. "Nora," she said, her voice soft, "I just want to talk." I let her in, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. I knew why she was here. We sat in the kitchen, the tin of cookies on the table between us. I poured 2 cups of tea, and we sat in a heavy silence. "It just doesn't sound like you," she began, her voice gentle. "Throwing out your own parents over a misunderstanding?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor. I told her everything. I told her about the house I bought, the bills I paid, and the Christmas Eve betrayal. I told her how my parents had made room for 28 people, including a neighbor and 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade, but not their own granddaughter. Aunt Elaine's face paled. "I didn't know," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. "They didn't tell you," I corrected her. She left a few minutes later, the tin of cookies still untouched on the table. She left like someone who had just heard a ghost story, a terrible tale she couldn't unhear. 3 days later, I received a text from her. It was a simple message I didn't understand before. "I do now." A week before the 60-day deadline, my lawyer called. "They haven't moved at all," he said, his voice laced with a hint of concern. "Then we proceed." I responded, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. That same day, I put the house on the market, priced it fairly, not inflated. I wasn't looking to squeeze out every dollar. I just wanted to be done. A buyer made an offer quickly. A young family with 2 small children. They only had one condition: the place needed to be completely vacated. Vacant possession required. My agent reminded me. "Understood," I said. I didn't go on the day they were removed. The new owners handled it through official legal processes. From what I heard, it wasn't pleasant. My mother and father, old and set in their ways, were confused and angry. They couldn't understand how their little failure adapter daughter could do this to them. Janelle, of course, took them in, naturally. She had always enjoyed pretending to be the more compassionate one, the one who took care of everyone. She gave interviews to the cousins and other family members, as if she were on some kind of press tour. "She's abandoning them," she told them, "all because of one holiday misunderstanding." 3 weeks later, she was standing at my front door. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair tied back in a frazzled bun. She didn't even bother with a greeting. "I can't do it," she said, her voice a thin, reedy whine. "They're constantly bickering. Mom says the living room is too cramped. Dad complains that my kids are too loud. They won't even agree to share a bathroom. I'm losing my mind." I leaned against the doorway, my arms folded across my chest, a small, knowing smile on my face. She asked for money, just enough to cover a deposit on a rental. "No, Janelle," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You saw them turn Lily away on Christmas Eve and stood there doing nothing. That was your choice." I nodded slightly. "This is mine." She blinked, hesitated, then turned around and left without another word. A week later, she kicked them out as well. My parents ended up in a rental nobody would brag about. 2 small rooms, 1 space heater, and a crooked front step that leaned like a shrug. Their pensions barely covered the basics, just rent and groceries. The vacations were gone, the dinner parties over, the anniversary cruise they'd been planning, forgotten. They started reaching out to the extended family, trying to gain sympathy. They claimed I'd abandoned them without notice, said I was unstable, cold, always had been. But by then, I had already spoken to the uncles and cousins quietly. I had sent them proof-scanned bills I had covered, a copy of the eviction letter properly time-stamped and certified. One cousin simply replied, "Wow." Another sent a thumbs-up emoji. No one was rushing to rescue them, and I wasn't either. 2 months later, Lily and I were sitting on the porch, sipping iced tea, the sun warm on our faces. No plans, no pretending, just a peaceful afternoon. She said, "You know, Mom, I don't miss them." Neither did I. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I opened the message without thinking. Hope you're proud of what you've done. I deleted it instantly. No hesitation, no reaction. They'll probably text again, Lily said offhandedly. They always do, I replied. But they're not my problem anymore. And they weren't. They once said there wasn't room for Lily at their table. Now, there was no room in our lives for cruelty, control, or manipulation. We had finally found our own space, a space filled with warmth, love, and quiet peace, a space that was all our own.